Hi there, and welcome to the Cotswold Explorer. I'm Robin Shuckburgh, and today is the beginning of our great summer challenge. We're so looking forward to this. We're going to walk the whole of the Cotswold Way. We're standing at the moment right at the beginning of it. There's a little sign down here which says Bath 100 miles. We're going to walk it all. We're going to do it in stages. Some of you will already know this because we've announced it before. And we're doing it in aid of Sepsis Research. The reason for this is that 18 months ago, I was in a pretty ropey way. It's reasonable to say that I had lost all ability to put one foot in front of another. So to be able to walk the 100 miles to Bath is pretty amazing for me. And in order to give some kind of thanks for the people who've fixed all this, we're going to try and raise some money while we're going. So when you come to walk the Cotswold Way, it starts here in Chipping Campden. Take some time to have a look at this astonishing village. It is very beautiful, and we are going to film our journey all the way 105 miles to Bath. So, join us on a weekly basis from now for another 10 weeks, and we will see you in Bath on the 13th of September. So we head off, leaving behind us the wonderful market building built for the village by the first Viscount Campden, Sir Baptist Hicks, whose generosity was responsible for so many of Camden's treasures. The almshouses, a fair bit of the church, and the wonderful banqueting houses that are all that is left of his great house. But more of that later. This town was built on the wool business, and survived the collapse of that industry by diversifying into silk throwing and latterly into arts and crafts. A resilient community with a fascinating history. If you're interested in the full story, please do click on the link in the description of this video that'll take you to our film on the village. But here's a short clip. I'm sorry to interrupt you just at the beginning of this wonderful series we're going to have such fun making of walking the Cotswold Way, but I want to remind you to subscribe to the channel, press the notification button, and we will keep you posted every single time we put something up about this long 10-week walk. There are all kinds of good reasons why Campden can be seen today as one of the most amazing towns in the Cotswolds, but its reliable commercial success over the years, or indeed its historical social cohesion, are certainly not amongst them. On the contrary, as we have seen so many times in our travels, the reason this place is so breathtakingly beautiful is certainly partly down to its extremely checkered life. It sits in one of those classic Cotswold folds in the landscape, overlooking the vales, with steep access roads and an unforgiving terrain. For now, we walk towards the steep side of Dover Hill, outside Chipping Campden, starting through a quiet suburb, amusingly named Back Ends, when I notice a blue plaque on a lovely thatched cottage. Graham Greene, one of our greatest 20th century men of letters, spent 2 years living in Little Orchard Cottage on Hoe Lane, Back Ends, from 1931 to 1933, with his wife Vivian and his Pekingese dog called Pico. He'd planned to stay for a year, but that soon turned into 2, despite the cottage's lack of electricity at the time and the rats, which he complained about in his letters. Just a few hundred yards, and we've already discovered something extraordinary. This bodes rather well. We're less than a mile from the beginning of this challenge, and we've walked up the hill out of Chipping Campden, up what's called Dover's Hill, which we'll tell you a little bit about in a minute. But I'm already discovering how much of a challenge this is likely to be. Fortunately, someone had the presence of mind to put a bench here for me to sit on to rest at the top of the hill. Ross and I have just been put firmly to shame, particularly I have. Someone has just literally run past us. I mean, I'm sitting here exhausted already, and he ran by as if the world was nothing. I'm deeply ashamed. Having passed Graham Greene's erstwhile residence and struggled, yes, I do know I really have to get my act together, up to the top of the hill, and having been humiliated by the young man who ran past us, not even out of breath, while we panted on the bench, we cross a road and stroll down a level path where, looking back across the valley, we can see Chipping Campden below us. I'm reminded of a passage from Evans's Highways and Byways in Oxford and the Cotswolds, the guide we've followed for so long, describing the destruction of Baptist Hicks's house. Sir Baptist Hicks was the youngest son of a Gloucestershire man who had set up business as a mercer in London. His shop was at the sign of the White Bear in Cheapside, and when Baptist succeeded to the business, he made money so fast that he was able to advance large sums to King James and the Scottish nobles who frequented the court. In this connection, his elder brother Michael, the ancestor of Sir Michael Hicks Beach, who held a post about the court, was able to render him much assistance. It was in 1609 that he bought the manor of Camden, and about 1613 he built the splendid mansion to the south of the church, the scanty remains of which are among the first objects to arouse the curiosity of the stranger. In point of fact, beyond the curtilage wall and a few outbuildings, there is nothing left but a fragment of wall containing one side of the entrance, together with a couple of windows and two pavilions or belvederes, one at either end of the terrace. The house must have been a magnificent one, considering that it cost £29,000 of the money of that time to build. Unfortunately, no contemporary drawing of it exists, but it is said to have been built in the Italian style, which indeed would be antecedently possible, and to have been crowned with a transparent dome in which a light was kept burning after dark as a guide to benighted wanderers on the wolds. Sir Baptist, who had been raised to the peerage in 1628 as Viscount Camden, died in 1629, and his house survived him less than a score of years. The cause of its destruction was the same that proved the ruin of many a stately pile throughout the land, the Civil War. At the beginning of 1645, Camden House was garrisoned by the Royalists under Sir Henry Bard, a good soldier but a true specimen of the profane and rapacious cavalier who had risen from the ranks, and who, from his plundering excursions in the country round, had made the garrison almost equally detested by both parties. These forays, which extended even as far as Winchcombe, where the victims complained they had not even a Sunday shift of clothes left them, went on till May. On the 7th of that month, the king, attended by his nephews Robert and Maurice, set out on his march from Oxford to relieve the siege of Chester. On the 8th, he held a council at Stowe, where he spent the night, and on the 9th he passed within sight of Camden on his way over Broadway Hill. Meanwhile, Bard had received an order from Prince Rupert to draw off his men and join the king's army. But, lest the enemy should make use of the house for garrison when he had left it, he was further ordered to set the place on fire before he marched off. This was forthwith done, and as the rear guard quitted the high ground to march down Broadway Hill, they took their last look at the blazing ruins of the mansion. This perhaps is the last opportunity to see the kind of view they must have seen, with smoke rising from the terrible fire that destroyed the magnificent house of Baptist Hicks. Very shortly we come to a gate, the likes of which we're going to become extremely familiar with over the next few weeks. And beyond it, we find ourselves on the remarkable flat top of Dover Hill. Very little prepares you for the extraordinary view with which you're greeted on broaching the top of the Cotswold escarpment. This is the first of many moments we will experience over the next few weeks, when our breath will be taken away by the sheer beauty of the English countryside. As if I can afford to have what's left of my breath removed. The surface of the long field that leads across Dover Hill is close cropped by a flock of sheep, as it has been for centuries, perhaps millennia. The hill is named after Robert Dover, who, in the reign of James I, became a very popular man in this country by his hospitality and his generosity. So wrote Samuel Rudder, the author of the New History of Gloucestershire in the 1770s. He continued, in 1612 he instituted an annual meeting for the practice of all sorts of manly exercises, and distributed prizes to those that excelled in them. He tells us that there were still meetings for the purpose every Thursday in Whitsun week. That's in 1770. Dover had been incensed by the Puritan insistence on cancelling any activity that could be construed as pleasurable, including celebrations of Christmas. The Cotswold Olympics was his response. He clearly caught the zeitgeist, as poems were written recording the fun and games, and a medieval poster showing all the activities that took place gives us an unusual insight into the enthusiasm with which it was greeted. These days, the friends of the Cotswold Olympics still manage to keep this wonderful event alive. This May, I'm afraid we just missed it. Next year, we'll be there for certain. Walking towards the end of the field, we come across another old friend. When we first started this little venture, this amazing challenge which we're enjoying so much, I rang an old colleague and friend called Mike Reed, the 1960s and 70s DJ, because he'd walked the Thames Path and I wanted a little bit of advice. Apart from boasting that he walked 20 miles a day on average, which is something I'm not even going to try and compete with, he said the key thing to do is to make sure you enjoy yourself. This walk wouldn't let you do anything else. We're only a couple of miles in and this incredible view is in front of us. It's astonishing. And here on the top of this plinth is a beautiful bronze plaque, and it reads, in memory of Benjamin Martin Chandler and Frederick Landseer Griggs, R.A., by whose efforts Dover's Hill, which is the hill we're standing on, was acquired for the National Trust in 1926. Griggs is very important to us. He is the man who illustrated the guide the Cotswold Explorer has been following all this time in 1905, written by Herbert Evans. So we feel great gratitude to Mr. Griggs for all kinds of reasons. From here, before we drop a little back from the edge of the escarpment, if you peer over the edge into the valley, you just might catch a glimpse of the delightful, delicate church spire at Saintbury, where Robert Dover lived. We saw this church a while back after a visit from the moronic gangsters who rob country churches of the lead from their roofs had left Saintbury leaking water and in grave danger. The medieval wall paintings in the church might so well have been washed away for good, and the fabric of the building would, in the end, have given in. Fortunately, the church's conservation trust has taken on the challenge, and the little church is now waterproof. You're looking down on the final resting place of William Latimer. A friend of Grocyn and Linacre, the three of them helped plant the study of Greek at Oxford. The value of their work is impossible to gauge, allowing as it did our academic ancestors to understand the philosophy and learning of past civilizations, a contribution much praised by Erasmus himself, who pressed Latimer, unsuccessfully, for his help in compiling the second edition of his Greek Testament. Latimer was buried in 1545 in an unmarked grave in the little churchyard of Saintbury, where for many years he'd been vicar. We visited Saintbury after the robbery, but before the church's Conservation Trust did its work, but the link to our film is in the description. After recrossing the road, our route now takes us on a fairly level path across several fields towards the top of Fish Hill, the peak above the village of Broadway, which is topped with the folly called Broadway Tower. A car park at the top of the hill is useful for walkers and travellers alike, and look out for the distance marker in the little copse just before you get to the car park, where you can discover how far you are from all sorts of places, including New York. The path crosses the main road at the top of Fish Hill, leading you on a track that roughly follows the contours of the hill round to Broadway Tower. I can find no really convincing explanation for the name of this hill. Some suggest it's because it was a road used by fishmongers to bring their wares to central England. Unlikely, it seems to me. Perhaps it had something to do with the way the road, climbing the numbingly steep slope, thrashes from side to side like a fish's tail. Frankly, your guess is as good as mine. What I do know is that this route was increasingly important to people and businesses alike, and was responsible for the development of the settlement of Broadway at the bottom of the hill. Fresh horses were certainly needed to pull coaches or carts up this hill, and a whole settlement of inns, chandlers and horsey people in general grew up at the base. But before we get to the village, we pass the amazing Broadway Tower, perched on the top of the escarpment. This folly was built between 1797 and 1798 to the commission of the 6th Earl of Coventry. It was designed by the architect James Wyatt. Over the years, the tower has been inspirational for a variety of creative people. Thomas Phillips had his early printing press here. He was one of the greatest ever collectors of books and manuscripts. Many of the arts and crafts movement used the building as a kind of 19th century Airbnb. The pre-Raphaelite artists Dante Gabriel Rossetti, Edward Burne-Jones and William Morris himself were frequent visitors. It occurs to me that it could easily have been the inspiration for the Airbnb name. From the top, it has one of the most extraordinary views on the whole 100-mile walk. It's said you can see 13 different counties from up there. For us, the drone has saved me the extra climb, but we don't advise the use of drones here. They are a bit frowned upon. We've reached the first of the really big landmarks on our walk. It's Broadway Tower, which you see behind me. And it's an extraordinary place, this. There's a beautiful herd of deer in the field beside me, at which Gizmo is looking with great intent. And we are now downhill all the way to the end of our first stage, which is in Broadway Village itself. It's been an absolutely amazing walk so far. It's a tiny piece of the whole project, but it has been, without any doubt, a wonderful experience so far. The path takes us down the side of the tower past the deer enclosure, where poor old Gizmo was frightened out of his wits by a huge mother deer, very protective of her offspring. We were glad of the sturdy fence between these magnificent creatures and our frail human bodies. The path takes you straight down the hill, resorting to the occasional flight of steps to deal with the gradient, and brings you into the edge of town, perfectly placed for a stroll down the length of Broadway's wonderful High Street. This village, famous around the world, was discovered in the 1880s by American artist Francis Millet, who created one of the most successful and influential artists' communities here. He bought a run-down, almost dilapidated ecclesiastical building called Abbott's Grange, where his friends and fellow artists could work. The building is now a very high-level B&B and acts as a directional sign for the Cotswold Way, which turns left at the bottom of the High Street. Once again, a link to our film about this wonderful village is in the description of this video. And here's a little clip.
Smaller than many of the other famous Cotswold towns, Broadway is on the northern tip of the region, actually just in the county of Worcestershire. But it's surrounded on three sides by the rather more familiar Cotswold county of Gloucestershire. You could easily be forgiven for assuming that it was named after its extraordinarily beautiful wide high street, lined with chestnut trees, golden medieval stone buildings, and a plethora of shops, cafes, hotels and pubs, which lead you down to the village green at the bottom. Broadway is well worth a visit for this street alone.
We're starting the second day of our wonderful walk down the Cotswold Way, where we finished our first, of course, in Broadway, this beautiful village that is one of the great stars of the Cotswolds. Almost all of you will have heard of it. Those of you who have been watching the Cotswold Explorer may well have seen our film on Broadway. Many people believe, not surprisingly, considering it's regurgitated in almost every guide of the Cotswolds, that this village gets its name from the broad thoroughfare you see behind me, stretching up to the other end of the village. Very beautiful though it is, and with all the facilities you might need as a visitor, it simply isn't true. The original village of Broadway is 2 miles in that direction, where the parish church of the original village still stands. It's an intriguing myth perpetrated by all the guides. Never mind. Come with us. We're going to show you what happens between here and Stanway in the second half of this film of our walk. Don't forget, we're doing this in aid of sepsis awareness. Some of you will remember that about 18 months ago, I was extremely ill. I very nearly didn't come back to join you as a result of an attack of sepsis. And I'm now trying to raise a little bit of money in order to give them some help into the research. We have a Just Giving page. Please visit it and offer your support. Meanwhile, come with us.
After the short time we've been on the Cotswold Way, a couple of things have become a little clearer. Remember, this is the very first time for me, and whilst Ross is an enthusiastic walker, he hasn't been around long enough to have gained huge experience, so we weren't quite sure how easy it would be to stick to the path. Fortunately, I'm able to report that the National Trails Organisation has done a pretty amazing job of marking this route. It is true that you sometimes have to pause and look around for the signs, and I'm sure that as we progress we will discover in the more remote places that a combination of confusing evidence of lots of people branching off from the official route and naughty people messing with the signage will give us pause for thought, but we are much more relaxed than we were when we started. We start walking south from the Grange along the road to Snowshill and towards the original Broadway village, where you would find the lovely parish church, and it might be tempting to carry on along this road just to have a look. Our advice is to make do with a glance at our film about this church, part of our latest Broadway post, and look out for the turning right off the road, signed with the iconic acorn logo. If you miss this, such is the confusing way in which the folds in the Cotswold's escarpment are made up, you would find yourself a long way from where you're meant to be. So take to the fields towards the stream at the bottom of the valley, and if you're lucky, you won't come immediately to the little problem of a flock of tups laying stubbornly in and around the gate through which you have to find your way. The young but extremely well-formed teenage male sheep clearly weren't interested in letting us through, and Ross asked me what the etiquette was for moving sheep out of the way. Drawing on my extensive experience of sheep management in 1968 Australia, I suggested respectful but firm. With the reluctant and very nervous help of Gizmo, we managed to persuade these disdainful animals to shift just long enough for us to squeeze through the gate, whereupon they took up their positions again to thwart anyone following us.
Hello guys. Come on you old fellas. How am I supposed to move you? Go on. Go on.
Sticking firmly to the fence at the right of the field, you come to a bridge over the stream, surprisingly called Waterloo Bridge, the reason for which is obscure, and across the level field towards the increasingly inevitable foot of the extremely steep escarpment. Once we had slithered down the hill from Broadway Tower, there was never any way to escape the climb up to the top again.
We're about half a mile outside the village of Broadway, and we came down that wonderful hill from the tower, and that was such a nice business walking down the hill. There's one small drawback. At some stage you always have to climb again, and we are now at the bottom of the escarpment hill going up into Broadway Coppice. Come with us.
The climb is steep, but well laid out and not as difficult as I made it look. The reward is absolutely fantastic. The views are just extraordinary. The wood at the top is called Broadway Coppice, and I noticed that farms and other features of the landscape are called Pie Coppice, Pie Farm, and so on. Now, magpies had an extremely strong superstitious importance in the medieval world, and this area was obviously well supplied with the lovely black and white crows.
I think it's fair to say I made that hill look a little more difficult than it really is. We've just climbed up all the way from the valley in which the village of Broadway sits. My apparently laboured countenance, I keep having to remind myself that 18 months ago, almost to the day, my wife got a phone call from the John Radcliffe Hospital where I was laid up, from my extraordinary surgeon, Mr. Silver, to say that I was very unlikely to survive the night, and that if I did, I would almost certainly be on dialysis for the rest of my life. I'd already had 2 heart attacks. I was in a very bad way. Now, the truth is that the fact that I'm here at all is incredibly lucky. Huge numbers of people my age die, 50,000 at least in England alone, and when you look at the American figures, the numbers are positively terrifying. We need to know why it is that someone like me can even consider the possibility of walking 105 miles across this amazing countryside only 18 months later, whereas others lose limbs, die in their droves. That's why we're doing this, to raise money for sepsis awareness, and we are just giving pages, obviously, on this channel. Have a look at it, please, guys, and help us raise some money towards this good cause.
Looking over the edge of the vertiginous slope, you might see the little village of Buckland, another interesting little place we've visited before. an excellent country house hotel right next to a fascinating church made for a lovely place to stay. Ross and I had a warming cup of tea in this hotel on a very cold day. My memory is of a warm welcome, including the dogs, rows of welly boots waiting for their guests to take to the hills if they chose to, and a rather lovely old-fashioned uniformed and friendly staff. By all means, have a glance at our film of the village. The link, as always, is in the description. The walk takes us along the edge of the escarpment, past numerous deserted and defunct medieval stone quarries. And just before we reach the moment of our next descent, we come to a fork in the path. Our track goes right towards the great hill fort of Shuckburgh and on down to the village of Stanton. But going left is a footpath leading to the little village of Snowshill. Ross and I have spent a good deal of time in Snowshill recently, working with the National Trust, making a documentary film about the extraordinary manor house and the unique collection it contains. Your timing is good, because the film will be released on the Cotswold Explorer channel within the next couple of weeks. If you haven't already done so, just press the subscribe button and the notification bell beside it, and we will let you know the minute it goes live. I am personally delighted with the film, just as I am with the collection itself. And so off to the right past the hill fort and down into the village of Stanton. It's a horsey place, is Stanton. We've never been here without meeting several people mounted on shiny chestnut steeds, looking glamorous and confident in their pastime. There's an excellent country pub at the apex of the village where a great and welcoming pint is to be had.
It's rather wonderful to be back in the little village of Stanton. We've come down off the hill and here we are in this fantastically beautiful village. We have memories of this place because it's on this very spot that we first introduced to you young Gizmo here, who's now been with us for all those years. We're just next to the lane that goes down to the church, well worth a visit. It really makes it all the more sad that Widget can't be with us because he's such an old fella.
The end of our first stage of this challenge is in sight. On pretty level ground, we walk across the ancient grassland that forms a large part of the great Stanway House estate. Corrugated as far as the eye can see with the remnants of the medieval strip farming system, these fields have been grazed smooth by cattle and Cotswold sheep for centuries. This wonderful parkland, planted with carefully constructed coppices of now ancient trees, is an exceptional survivor of past millennia, laid out by the Tracy family. I can't help a sense of excitement as we approach what is, to date, my favourite Cotswold stately home. We're very familiar with it, with its history, and indeed with its owner, Lord Weems, who, having cooperated generously and freely with our effort to document the history of his estate, has become something of a YouTube star. It is my pleasure to suggest to you that if you have made it this far through this video, it will likely be to your taste to watch the completed film, the link for which, it will surprise you to know, is in the description below.
So we finish our very first film about the Cotswold Way walk in aid, you'll remember, of Sepsis Research.org. Very important because I'm exhausted after all this time. And whilst it's been absolutely amazing, we've finished today in front of one of my very favourite places in the whole of the Cotswolds. Behind me is the main gateway to Stanway House. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We'll then let you know, as long as you press the notification bell, exactly when our next walk film will be put up. And you'll get to see us walk another section of the Cotswold Way.